In the heart of Brooklyn, where rain-whipped streets hide secrets in every puddle, a retired detective named Michael Hayes dares to rekindle a bond that once saved his life. Welcome to Vale Marks, where every story peels back the layers of loyalty and courage. As Maya Angelou reminded us, we may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. Tonight's journey will lead you through storm-lashed porches and haunted memories, all for the chance to bring back a hero in a four-legged friend. Stay with us, absorb every moment, and prepare your heart for a lesson in unbreakable devotion. Comment below and join our quest toward 1,000 subscribers. Michael Hayes sat alone in the dim glow of his desk lamp, its yellowed light barely cutting through the deepening twilight that pushed long, wavering shadows across the walls of his modest home office. Every surface was crowded with framed photographs and mementos documenting a career he had once believed would never truly end. Him and Shadow, the German shepherd he had trained and run beside for so many years, posed in full K9 uniform at the academy graduation, sprinting through obstacle courses in blazing sunlight, and kneeling together behind patrol cars as city sirens echoed through stormy nights. A battered radio perched on a corner shelf crooned a slow, mournful jazz melody, its soft, brassy notes drifting across the room like a memory he could taste on his tongue. The orange glow of the setting sun filtered through half-drawn curtains, bleeding rich hue after hue of gold and crimson across the faded wallpaper, and the hush of a gentle rain tapping against the window panes mingled with the distant, mournful wail of a passing patrol vehicle's siren. In that fragile half-light, Michael reached out with trembling fingers to a polished badge resting next to a black and white photograph of himself and Shadow on the day of his promotion, his hand shaking ever so slightly as he brushed the cool metal, fingertips tracing the edges worn smooth by years of faithful service. He stared down at the badge as though it held the power to restore everything he had lost. And for a moment, he could almost hear Shadow's low, urgent bark, calling him back into the darkness of a rooftop rescue, the memory as vivid as if it were happening again, right now. Then the phone on his mahogany desk broke the spell with a sudden, sharp ring, slicing through the melancholy jazz and the patter of raindrops like a signal flare in the gathering gloom. Michael's heart skipped, and he swallowed hard before lifting the receiver, the line crackling to life in his ear. On its small digital display flickered the name Shelter Brooklyn, 3 words that felt both impossibly hopeful and achingly uncertain. He straightened, the badge still slipping through his fingers, and managed to whisper, "Hayes," his voice rough with surprise and something like fear. A pause followed, a hesitant breath on the other end, and then a woman's voice, soft and cautious, spoke his name as if she were afraid to shatter the fragile moment. "Mr. Hayes, this is Ellie at the Brooklyn Animal Shelter. We have information about your former partner." Michael's breath caught at the edges of his lungs. The room seemed to plunge into deeper shadow even though the lamp burned on, and the gentle jazz stuttered to a lower, more tentative volume. Rain slid slowly down the window in rivulets, mirroring the tremor he felt in his chest, and the distant sirens sank into silence as though the city itself were holding its breath. He closed his eyes, the past rushing in like a tide, the very first time he had heard Shadow's insistent bark piercing the roar of thunder, the way she had bounded toward a burning car to pull him to safety, her sleek coat gleaming wet under the flashing red lights. He remembered the grit of soot in his teeth, the burning heat on his face, and the moment he had looked into her eyes and realized that she would run through fire itself for him. Now, 2 long years had slipped past since the day he retired, trading in his uniform for civilian clothes and hanging up his badge with a sense of quiet finality that had never really felt final. Since then, the corners of his life had grown too tidy, the rooms too still, and the silence so loud that he could almost hear the echo of his own regret. He had never fully accepted that he and Shadow had drifted apart when the department reassigned her after that last injury in the field, and every morning he still reached for the leash that wasn't there. Every night, he listened for the click of her paws on the floorboards, for the familiar nudge of her nose against his hand. Instead, he found only the muted hum of the radio and the persistent drip of water from the leaky sink in the other room. But now this call, this single, unexpected ring, had reopened a door he thought had closed for good. With one hand still clutching the badge and the other gripping the phone, he forced himself to breathe. "Tell me everything," he said, voice husky with emotion. On the other end, Ellie paused again, gathering courage before continuing. "We received a transfer yesterday. Your partner, is here. She's been through a lot, but she's safe. We thought you should know." A crackle of static, a distant echo of footsteps in the shelter hallway. Then Ellie added, "I'm sorry it wasn't sooner, but I wanted to be sure before I called." Michael pressed his free hand to his chest, where his heart thundered like a runaway train. He imagined Shadow in that noisy, unfamiliar place, her posture stiff with anxiety, her eyes wide with the same doubt he felt in himself. Yet under that fear, he sensed a spark, just a flicker, waiting to be reignited. "Thank you," he whispered into the receiver, his voice steadier now, resolve hardening behind the ache. "I'll be there as soon as I can." He set the phone down, letting the receiver rest against his shoulder for a moment, and stared out at the storm-streaked window. The world beyond was a blur of rain and street lamp glow, but inside him something stirred, a slow, steady pulse of hope. Would this call heal the gaping wound his retirement had torn open? Or would it shatter him all over again if Shadow no longer remembered him? He did not yet know. All he knew was that by dawn he would have his answer, and whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, because some bonds refuse to break, even when the rest of the world tries to forget. Michael navigated the slick streets of Brooklyn with deliberate care, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against a sky that refused to clear, as if the clouds themselves had something urgent to say. The amber pools of streetlights shimmered on wet asphalt, creating a fractured mosaic of light and shadow that danced across the hood of his car as he drove deeper into the heart of the borough. Every turn brought a faint echo of memories. The night Shadow had bounded beside him under similar skies, her coat glistening with rain, her paws sure-footed on every curb. Now, as he approached the aging brick facade of the Brooklyn Animal Shelter, the hum of his engine faded into the hush of the storm, punctuated only by distant thunder and the soft hiss of water running off the roof. He parked under a flickering neon sign, the word "shelter" glowing intermittently, and stepped out into the damp chill, the scent of gasoline from passing cars mingling with the clean sting of disinfectant that wafted from just inside the open door. Inside, fluorescent bulbs cast a harsh, bluish glow on long, empty corridors lined with rows of metal kennels. The air held the tang of mildew and antiseptic, a bitter reminder of loneliness and confinement, tempered by the occasional, tentative bark that echoed from some distant corner, as though a soul behind a cage were calling out in hope or in despair. Michael's boots made soft thuds on the concrete floor as he followed Ellie, the shelter's receptionist, down the hallway. Her expression was warm but haunted, as if she carried the weight of every animal she had ever tried and failed to comfort. Beside her walked Dr. Anna Lee, the veterinarian, whose gentle eyes spoke volumes of empathy. Each time she glanced at Michael, her brows knit with concern for the man she had only just met, yet whose pain she could already sense. Ellie paused at the last kennel on the right, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she unlocked the latch. The door swung open with a soft creak, and there, in the dim enclosure, sat Shadow, her silhouette rigid, her head lowered, ears pinned back in wary submission. The golden brown of her coat was dulled by weeks of neglect, and her once proud posture had curved into a crouch of uncertainty. Michael stopped short, his heart contracting at the sight of the dog he had once known so well. Gathering himself, he knelt beside the kennel and placed one gloved hand against the cool metal mesh. He tapped gently on the glass, eyes unwavering, and whispered the single word he had practiced on the drive over. "Shadow?" His voice broke the silence like a fragile promise. Shadow lifted her head, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and fear, but the recognition he had dreamed of did not light their depths. Instead, they held only a vacant uncertainty, as though she were peering through him into some other place where he did not exist. Michael's chest tightened, the air suddenly too heavy to draw a full breath. He bent his face closer, so that the light from the corridor painted faint patterns on his features, and asked again, voice softer now, "Do you recognize me?" Ellie's voice drifted over the quiet, barely louder than the patter of raindrops on the shelter's roof. "We've tried everything, Mr. Hayes, but she's very frightened." The words landed on him like stones, each one echoing the emptiness that had hollowed out his chest since retirement. He could almost feel Shadow's pulse through the mesh, quick and shallow, mirroring his own fear at this unexpected reunion. The sterile scent of disinfectant mingled with the musty odor of straw bedding, and Michael realized that somewhere beyond the metal bars, his partner's spirit had been obscured by loss and uncertainty. He closed his eyes, recalling the first night he had heard her bark in that violent storm, the way she had dug him out from beneath a pile of rubble after a collapsed wall during a hostage rescue. He remembered the clatter of debris, the acrid smell of smoke, and the surge of relief when he saw her silhouette emerge through the haze, her eyes focused solely on him. That unwavering loyalty had guided him through countless dangers, and now, faced with her unseeing gaze, he felt an urgency rise within him that he could neither quell nor deny. Opening his eyes, Michael pressed his palm against the mesh as if to will a spark of recognition into being. He straightened, voice edged with determination. "I won't give up on you." His words hung between them, a vow that shimmered in the cold neon light. Dr. Lee touched his arm gently, offering silent encouragement, while Ellie stepped back, allowing him the space to speak directly to Shadow. The distant echo of barking faded into the background as Michael resolved to reach beyond the kennel bars, to bridge the gap between fear and faith with every resource he had. In that moment, he understood that rekindling their bond would demand more than gentle words. It would require patience, consistency, and the weight of every shared memory they still carried within them. With a final look at the dog, who had once been his anchor, Michael rose to his feet and turned to Ellie. "I need to bring her home," he said quietly. Ellie nodded, her concern tempered by a flicker of hope. As she prepared the release forms, Michael took a steadying breath. The scent of damp concrete, antiseptic, and the faintest trace of gasoline grounding him in the reality of what lay ahead. He would need to lean on old instincts, the same instincts that had guided him through storms of steel and fire. As he signed the paperwork, he pictured Shadow's eyes gradually brightening with recognition, the tail's first tentative wag, the soft nudge of her nose against his hand once more. The promise of that future glimmered in his mind like the neon sign outside. Brief, flickering, but unmistakably alive. That drive home would test the limits of his determination. But as Michael led Shadow from the kennel into the shelter's entrance, he felt the first true stirrings of hope. He would draw upon every scrap of the past and every ounce of his resolve to bring back the trust that had once been their greatest strength. In the echo of her silent gaze, he sensed the echo of a bond that refused to be broken. And so, with the mist of rain still clinging to his coat, Michael whispered again, softly but firmly, "I'm here, Shadow. I've got you." Michael guided Shadow up the worn stone steps of his old Brooklyn brownstone, the dog's leash slack in his hand as they moved in quiet tandem through the late afternoon light. The front door, its paint chipped from years of sea spray wind and autumn rains, creaked open to reveal a narrow entryway lined with framed family photos. Portraits of Michael's daughter on her wedding day, a snapshot of Lily at her 7th birthday party, and, of course, the familiar photograph of Michael and Shadow in their K9 uniforms, taken before the accident that had changed everything. Shadow padded through first, her paws clicking softly on the hardwood floor as she paused to sniff at the base of the staircase, nostrils flaring with a curious mixture of recognition and uncertainty. The scent of old wood and the soft hum of distant traffic greeted them like an old friend, reminding Michael of the countless times he had returned from long patrols to this very spot, greeted by Shadow's eager nuzzle and the promise of rest. He followed her into the kitchen, dropping the leash onto a hook by the refrigerator and reaching for a clean bowl from a cabinet. The tile beneath his feet was cool, patterned in varying shades of teal and cream, and the sunlight filtering through a small window overhead cast dancing reflections on the stainless steel sink. Shadow sat waiting, her ears perked, as if she understood they were back home, a place she had known so well before everything changed. Michael filled the bowl with fresh water, then turned to the counter where he had set his phone to charge. The screen glowed with an incoming video call from Lily in looping pastel letters. He hesitated for a moment, lifting a hand to brush back a lock of silvering hair, before tapping the answer icon and placing it gently against the cool marble surface. Instantly, Lily's face filled half the screen, rosy-cheeked, wide-eyed, and framed by soft waves of brown hair that fell around her shoulders like sunlight. She wore her favorite pink sweatshirt, the one adorned with tiny stars that always made Michael smile, even on the toughest days. In the background, he could see her bedroom, scattered with stuffed animals and the faded banner from her last soccer tournament. Lily waved vigorously, her bright eyes sparkling with curiosity and longing. "Grandpa!" she exclaimed, her voice lilting with 8 years' worth of excitement and innocence. Then she leaned closer, brow furrowed in concern. "Grandpa? Is Shadow okay?" "I miss her so much." Michael allowed himself a small, bittersweet smile as he knelt beside Shadow, reaching out to gently scratch behind her ear. The dog leaned into his hand, closing her eyes for a moment, as if savoring the touch she once knew as life-saving comfort. "I miss you and her too, Lily," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She's safe now, and we're together again." He glanced at Shadow, then back at Lily's hopeful face on screen. "We're going to figure this out, I promise." As the rain pattered against the kitchen window, Michael caught his own reflection beside Lily's image. An aging detective with lines etched by years of service and sleepless nights, but with eyes alight with determination. In that moment, the weight of his promise to Lily pressed down on him like the storm clouds rolling overhead. It was no longer just about rescuing Shadow from fear and confusion. It was about honoring the unspoken bond between grandfather and granddaughter, preserving a thread of continuity between past and future. Michael remembered tucking Lily into bed after her first day of kindergarten, the way she had clung to Shadow's collar for comfort when her mother was away on business. He recalled her laughter whenever Shadow performed a perfect sit or paw, and the time she had cried when Shadow had disappeared during that disastrous transfer 2 years ago. All of those memories swelled within him now, fueling a resolve that burned brighter than any siren light he had ever chased. Lily's gaze softened as she watched Shadow at his feet, the dog's tail sweeping a slow rhythm against the hardwood. She reached out toward the screen, as if to touch them both, her fingertips brushing the glass. "Please bring her back soon," she whispered, voice catching in her throat. "I can't sleep without knowing she's okay." Michael's chest tightened. He pressed his free hand against his heart, feeling the steady thud of his heartbeat, a living reminder of every promise he had ever made. "I will, sweetheart," he said, voice unwavering now. "I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring Shadow back to us." Shadow lifted her head at his words, eyes warm with a spark of recognition that seemed to mirror Michael's own fierce determination. The room was filled with the soft sigh of the wind outside and the distant rumble of a subway train beneath the earth. But in that moment, all Michael heard was the echo of a vow he could not break. He gently scooped up the leash again, meeting Shadow's gaze. "Come on, girl," he murmured, offering her a half-smile. "We have work to do." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his coat pocket, the screen going dark, but the memory of Lily's face lingering in his mind like a beacon. As they moved toward the living room, Michael ran a hand over the back of the couch, where he and his granddaughter would often share popcorn and old detective movies. He remembered Lily's infectious giggle when Shadow would chase the ball into the screen, and the way she would clap her hands in delight at every triumphant fetch. Now, those moments lay suspended in time, waiting for him to restore their place in their shared story. Standing by the window, Michael gazed out at the rain-soaked street. The droplets raced each other down the glass, just as he and Shadow had raced each other through training courses so many years ago. He felt a renewed sense of purpose course through him, a vow sealed not by badge or uniform, but by love and responsibility to family, past, present, and future. With Shadow at his side and Lily in his heart, Michael knew that no obstacle, no distance, and no fear could stand in the way of bringing his partner home once more. He turned away from the window, flicked off the lights, and together they stepped into the quiet promise of the night. The night air was cool and damp as Michael stepped onto the porch, the single yellow bulb above the doorway casting a warm, muted glow over the slick boards beneath his feet. Rain pattered steadily against the corrugated metal awning, creating a steady rhythm that matched the thump of his heart. He set a small, worn canvas bag on the porch rail and withdrew 3 items, laying them out in a careful semicircle on the weathered wood. The training whistle that had summoned Shadow through wind and rain, the faded rubber ball she had chased across countless fields, and his polished K9 badge, its edges smoothed by years of handling. Each item was a fragment of their shared past, a testament to nights spent training under harsh lights and days filled with the promise of partnership. Kneeling beside the display, Michael inhaled deeply, the scent of damp wood and fresh ozone mingling with the faint tinge of brass and rubber. Shadow stood a few paces away, her posture tense, ears flattened against her head as she hesitated on the threshold between shelter and home. In the half-light, her coat looked duller than he remembered, and her eyes, those keen, amber eyes, were clouded with uncertainty. Still, she took a tentative step forward, nose quivering as she approached the whistle first, sniffing at it with soft whines of recognition. Her tail twitched once, twice, and then settled into a slow, hesitant wag that spoke of buried instincts stirring beneath layers of fear. Michael leaned closer, voice low but steady, as the wind moaned around them. "Do you remember the time you ran through that storm to save me?" he asked, his words carrying over the hiss of rain and the distant murmur of city traffic. He blew gently on the whistle, producing a faint, mournful note that seemed to echo in the darkness. At the sound, Shadow's head snapped up, her eyes widening, as though she was searching the shadows for the familiar shape she once followed without question. A gust of wind rattled the porch railing, and the whistle's note faded into the night, replaced by the soft rush of air through the narrow gaps in the siding. Inside Michael, hope and despair warred in a tumultuous swirl. He could feel the weight of every memory pressing on him. The nights they had spent practicing recall drills beneath harsh floodlights. The moments she had lunged to pull him away from danger, her fierce devotion unshakable, even when everything else seemed uncertain. He acknowledged the gnawing regret at having retired earlier than either of them expected, the ache of guilt that whispered, "What if I had stayed?" with every drop of rain that hit the porch. Yet in Shadow's hesitant wag, and the flicker of alertness in her gaze, he sensed a fragile spark of recognition, a glimmer of the bond that had once defined them both. Shadow moved next to the rubber ball, nudging it with her muzzle before looking back at Michael, as if inviting him to play as they had so many times before. He reached out, picking the ball up and pressing it gently between his palms. The rain fell more heavily now, soaking the edges of the badge and softening the leather of the ball. In that moment, Michael spoke again, his tone soft with longing. "I know things have changed, but I need you to know I'm here, Shadow. I haven't forgotten a single night we spent together." For an instant he thought he saw Shadow lower her head and press her flank against his knee, but then she drew back, retreating to the safety of the porch steps, eyes still wary, yet shining with something like curiosity. As the rain began to ease and the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, Michael rose to his feet, gathering the whistle, the ball, and the badge into his hands. He patted Shadow's side gently, feeling the tremble of her muscles beneath his palm, and whispered, "We'll figure this out, partner." Inside her mind, Shadow battled her own fears, the uncertainty of a place that smelled of strangers and antiseptic, the echo of treatment rooms and unfamiliar voices. Yet beneath that trepidation lay the indelible memory of her handler's steady voice, the feel of his hand as it rested on her head, the unwavering trust that had guided her through every peril. Something deep within her remembered safety, and something within Michael remembered the unbreakable promise they had once made to each other. By morning, Michael knew he needed more than a stormy porch and relics of the past to fully restore their connection. He warmed his hands on a cup of coffee in the kitchen. Shadow curled at his feet and reached for his phone. He dialed the number that had given him hope the night before, determined to enlist the help of his old partner, Sarah. Even as the line rang, he glanced down at Shadow's folded ears and felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. His promise to Lily and the promise to Shadow merged into a single resolution. He would uncover the truth behind Shadow's disappearance, heal the wounds that kept her distant, and bring her home again, no matter what it took. The echo of that vow lingered in the quiet kitchen, a bridge between past and future, between the man and the dog who had weathered every storm together. Sarah sat at her cluttered desk well past midnight, the only bright point in the darkened precinct room coming from the cool glow of her computer monitor and the golden halo of a small desk lamp. Stacks of manila folders leaned against each other like well-worn sentinels, their corners frayed from countless shifts of evidence and reports. A half-empty coffee mug bore a lipstick-smudged rim, standing as testament to Sarah's long hours, while a tangled skein of phone chargers and electrical cords coiled beneath the desk like restless serpents. On the screen in front of her, lines of text scrolled beneath surveillance stills, grainy black and white images captured by a trail camera mounted to Michael's porch. In one frame, a hooded figure stood just beyond the railing, the shadow of a brimmed cap obscuring any identifying features. The figure's posture was casual but deliberate, as if waiting for the right moment to move. Sarah frowned at the screen, her fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the desk. She clicked through to another file and brought up a dossier on Victor Caldwell, a name that had once resonated through K9 training circles like a warning bell. Caldwell had been a rising star until brutal complaints surfaced, accusing him of training methods that pushed dogs beyond their limits. He had been dismissed in disgrace, his credentials revoked, and quietly shunted aside by the department. Yet whispers persisted of a man determined to reclaim his reputation by seeking out retired service dogs, purportedly for special rehabilitation programs. Sarah scrolled through transaction records that hinted at secretive payments to private shelters, and her jaw tightened as she connected the dots. Caldwell's obsession with elite K9 units had not faded with time. It had only grown more invasive, more dangerous. A soft knock at the door interrupted her concentration, and Michael stepped in, rain droplets still clinging to his coat. He looked weary but resolute, Shadow's leash coiled in his hand as the German Shepherd waited quietly by the threshold. Sarah stood, moving to the corner of the desk where she spread out a map of Michael's property, trail cam prints pinned to its surface. She gestured to the hooded image. "He's been here more than once," she said, voice low but firm. "Caldwell is hunting retired K9 units. Shadow is his next target." Michael's face went pale. He leaned over the map, tracing the path from the porch camera to the back gate. "If he takes her," he whispered, his voice breaking, "everything ends." He looked up, eyes haunted by the possibility of loss, not just of a partner, but of a piece of his own heart. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her own resolve hardening beneath the strobe of concern in her gaze. In that moment, Sarah recalled the night she had first faced down danger for Michael, when an armed suspect cornered them during a routine stakeout. She had cradled her service pistol with steady hands, protecting her partner as he radioed for backup. The memory was both painful and galvanizing. The echo of a single bullet casing striking pavement, the way Michael's voice had crackled over the radio, demanding reassurance. She had walked into that darkness without hesitation, and she would do it again now. "Listen," she said, tilting her head toward the monitor. Caldwell's methods were experimental, pushing dogs until they broke. "We cannot let him get his hands on Shadow. We need to strike first." Michael nodded, swallowing hard. He straightened, the weight of responsibility settling over him like armor. They set to work, Sarah coordinating the installation of additional trail cameras at strategic angles, each one feeding live footage to her secure server. She called in favors to procure motion-activated floodlights for the back gate, strobe lights that would flash whenever someone stepped beyond the boundary. Michael made a list of the most vulnerable entry points: windows, a side door left ajar by a faulty latch, and pledged to reinforce each one with sturdy locks and steel bars. As the hours slipped away, they moved through a flurry of activity. Sarah programming the cameras to alert her phone, Michael testing the integrity of a newly bolted deadbolt on a rear window, Shadow at his heels, ever watchful. Every click of a lock and every flicker of a security light was a small victory against the unseen threat that had haunted their nights. The rain outside had eased to a gentle patter, but inside the precinct and Michael's home, an electric tension crackled like static. By dawn, the hollow hum of the precinct's fluorescent lights was replaced by the steady pulse of a secure perimeter. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbing tired eyes as she reviewed the final camera angles on her monitor. Michael entered the room, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He set one beside her keyboard and offered the other to Shadow, who accepted it with delicate licks. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah smiled tiredly, but confidently. "We'll keep her safe," she replied. "As long as we stay one step ahead of Caldwell, he'll never know what hit him." Outside, the sky lightened to a pale gray, ushering in the first hints of dawn. Despite the threat that still lingered like a shadow at the edge of their plans, Michael and Sarah felt a surge of hope. Together, they had turned uncertainty into action and fear into preparation. The unseen threat might be watching, but now they had the tools to fight back, and the resolve to protect the bond between a man and his canine partner at any cost. The clock on Michael's dashboard read 12, as he and Sarah crept toward the back gate of his brownstone, the night sky pitch black and rain hammering the tin awning overhead. The yard was a churned mess of mud and puddles, each step squelching beneath their boots. Shadow, now alert and tense at Michael's side, pressed close under the leash. Her ears pricked and muscles coiled like a spring. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and ozone, and distant thunder rumbled like a warning drum. It began with a sharp beep from Michael's phone, an alert from the trail camera installed beneath the porch roof. He snapped on the heavy-duty floodlight beside the kitchen window, flooding the yard with harsh white light that cut through the rain. Sarah stepped into view, her pistol drawn and ready, the barrel glinting wetly in the glare. From the darkness beyond the fence, 3 figures emerged. Victor Caldwell leading the way, his hood pulled low, and 2 of his hired men carrying backpacks bulging with gear. Small cylindrical flashlights swung at their sides, their beams slicing narrow paths through the downpour. Caldwell paused at the edge of the floodlit circle and called out in a calm, cold voice, "Shadow, you can't hide forever." At the sound of her name, Shadow growled low in her throat, hackles rising along her spine. The dog lunged forward, teeth bared, but Michael held her back with a firm grip. "Shadow, back!" he shouted, voice cracking with urgency. Sarah fired a single warning shot into the mud beside one intruder's boot. Clang and splash echoed like a storm unto itself. The intruders froze, stunned by the crack of gunfire. Caldwell took a step forward, unfazed by the gunshot. He glanced at the others and then back to Michael with a sneer. "You won't keep her safe for long," he taunted, his voice carrying across the waterlogged yard. Michael's heart pounded as he watched Shadow strain against her leash. He remembered the night of the warehouse fire, when flames had roared through stacked crates and thick smoke had billowed up to the ceiling. Shadow had dove past him into the inferno, snapping at his sleeve until he followed her to safety. She had emerged coughing and singed, but she had saved him without a second thought. Warm tears mixed with cold rain as he recalled her soft nuzzle afterward, the way she'd rested her head against his chest. Now, under the downpour, he felt that same surge of gratitude and fierce protectiveness. "She's family," he roared, voice raw with emotion. "Touch her, and you're dead." For a heartbeat, the yard fell silent, save for the hiss of rain and the soft crackle of distant thunder. Then Caldwell laughed, a low, cruel sound. "You can't hold her forever," he said. "One day, she'll slip away." Sarah brandished her pistol with steady hands. "You'll have to get through me first." Her words carried the weight of years on the force, of shared battles and unspoken loyalty. Caldwell's expression darkened. He motioned to his men, who hesitated, glancing uncertainly at the lit window behind Sarah where other cameras blinked. The glow of the floodlight made retreat as dangerous as advance. Shadow barked sharply, her body leaning forward in defiance, ready to protect Michael at any cost. With one last glare at Michael, Caldwell backed away, signaling his men. The trio melted into the night, figures hunched against the rain, disappearing into the darkness from which they had emerged. The floodlight clicked off as Michael hit the switch, leaving only the faint glow of the porch lamp. Michael dropped to his knees and unclipped Shadow's leash, wrapping his arms around her broad shoulders. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead as he buried his face in her wet coat. Shadow licked his cheek once, then settled her massive head in his lap, her body still trembling with adrenaline. When he finally looked up, the yard was silent again. The threat had vanished, but the memory of its approach lingered like a stain. Michael stroked Shadow's ears, voice soft but resolute. "You kept me alive once, and tonight you saved me again." He pulled her close as the rain eased to a soft drizzle and rainwater trickled off the eaves. For a moment, the world felt still. When the darkness was at its deepest, their bond burned brightest. The first light of dawn spilled across Michael's front yard like liquid gold, turning every blade of grass into a glittering beacon. Birds greeted the morning with exuberant song, their melodies weaving through the gentle breeze that carried the faint scent of dew and blooming jasmine. The world felt reborn, as if the trials of the night before had been washed away by the storm, leaving behind a promise of renewal. Michael stood at the edge of his porch, Shadow at his feet, her coat still damp but gleaming in the early sun. Beside him, Sarah adjusted her squad car's rearview mirror, and Lily clutched Shadow's leash with tender excitement, her 10-year-old face glowing with anticipation. They drove the short distance to Maplewood Senior Center, a modest brick building surrounded by flower beds and tall oaks whose branches reached out like welcoming arms. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few staff cars, and the hush of early morning lent the moment an almost sacred quality. Michael stepped out first, Shadow following with measured steps, her ears perking at every rustle of leaves. Lily bounded forward, tugging at Michael's hand. "Grandpa, Shadow's going to make them so happy," she whispered, her voice bright with hope. Inside the cheerful common room, sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating pastel-painted walls and rows of cozy armchairs. A small group of residents sat in a semicircle, their eyes lighting up as Michael, Sarah, Lily, and Shadow entered. At the center was Grace, a gentle-faced woman in her 80s, her silver hair pinned back in a neat bun. She smiled as Shadow approached, and Michael watched as the dog's confident steps gave way to a soft, respectful approach, her tail sweeping the floor in a slow, tentative wag. Grace reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and stroked Shadow's muzzle. Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "This dog is like an angel to my heart." The room filled with murmurings of agreement from the other residents, their faces softening with warmth. A man in a plaid shirt patted his chest and smiled, while a woman in a flowered dress leaned forward to scratch Shadow behind her ears. The atmosphere was charged with a gentle joy, as if each person's spirit had been lifted by the dog's calm presence. Michael knelt beside Shadow, his heart full. He murmured, "You've given us strength to carry on," his words quiet but sincere. Shadow looked up at him with her warm, understanding eyes. as though affirming that she felt the same bond of trust and love that had guided them through every trial. Lily giggled as Shadow nudged her hand, and Sarah stood nearby, her usual stoic demeanor softened by a rare smile. In that moment, Michael realized something profound. Friendship and loyalty did not belong solely to moments of danger and heroism. They extended beyond uniforms, beyond the constraints of time, and into the simple act of being present for one another. Shadow's calm acceptance here, far from the flashing lights and sirens, spoke to a deeper truth that Michael had once overlooked. This dog had been more than a partner in peril. She was a companion in life's gentle seasons, a healer who could mend hearts with a soft nuzzle. As the residents took turns sharing shy smiles and soft pats, Michael reflected on the journey that had led them here. The frantic race through thunderous storms, the tense standoffs in rain-soaked yards, and the sleepless nights spent guarding against unseen threats. Each challenge had strengthened their bond, forging a trust that transcended words. Now, in the unhurried light of day, that bond found its most peaceful expression. When the session concluded, Grace pressed a small bouquet of daisies into Michael's hand. "Thank you for bringing her," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. Michael bowed his head slightly and handed the flowers to Lily, who tucked them into her notebook with a delighted grin. Back on the porch, as Sarah and Lily said their goodbyes, Michael knelt beside Shadow and placed his hand on her flank. "We've been through so much, haven't we?" he whispered. Shadow leaned into his touch, her eyes reflecting the quiet contentment of a purpose fulfilled. Michael stood and addressed the camera crew who had been quietly filming for the shelter's awareness campaign. His voice carried the warmth of honest conviction. "True friendship knows no age. It walks with us through storms and sunshine alike." If this story has touched your heart, please share your own pet memories in the comments below. Let's spread hope together. Shadow gave a gentle bark as if in agreement, and Lily laughed, looping her arm through Michael's. Together, they watched the sunlight play across the yard, the birds still singing, and felt the enduring truth of a bond that time could neither diminish nor erase. As dawn bathes the world in golden light, Michael, Sarah, Lily, and their brave K9 partner find that true healing comes from open hearts and steadfast faith. This chapter closes with a promise. Compassion can transcend any darkness, and forgiveness can rebuild what time and fear have torn apart. If this story moved you, leave your reflections in the comments. Your words inspire us to craft deeper, more meaningful tales. Hit that subscribe button on Vale Marks and help us reach 1,000 supporters so we can continue sharing videos rich in hope and humanity. Remember, every bond we honor enriches us all.